Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host, and the goal of our Connections Radio Show is to explore a wide range of topics that challenge us to see ourselves, our community, and the world around us that get us thinking, get us feeling, get us imagining, and get us connected. Our show today is part of our Connections Community Partner Series, and this one is co-produced with the Reviving Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, RISE. Now, RISE's mission is to amplify the voice and power of Muslim women, and they do that through storytelling, leadership development, and civic engagement. My co-hosts are Aaisha Abdullahi, and before I move on, Aaisha is the Civic Engagement Coordinator. And we also have Lila El-Tawili. She is the co-founder of the East Metro for a Better Tomorrow. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Aaisha.
Thank you.
There
Thank you for having us.
I also want to shout a big shout out to Clockwork. Clockwork is sponsoring our show today. So last time that you were on the show, Aaisha, it was just before the elections on October 31st. And we had the pre-election jitters about what was going to happen. And today we're recapping the 2020 general election. And I'm so grateful to have you be part of our show and to be sharing your perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So not too long ago, we were here sitting nervously and anxious about what would the turnout of this election be. And thankfully, we got what we wanted with Biden-Harris. And the exciting victory for them. I think also it was really exciting to see all the Muslim women who were on the ballot take this opportunity to learn from this experience, as well as those that were reelected, such as Ilhan Omar and Hodan Hassan, Tina Smith. They all were able to get their seats back, whether it's in Congress or state legislators. And it was exciting to see Sharon be able to win her position on the Minneapolis School Board. So I think our hard work paid off, and the turnout was huge with this election.
And in thinking about it, what do you think that particularly means, especially for Muslim women?
I think that means representation, and I think that means our voices are going to start being heard and recognized and seen in office in certain positions. I think for a long time we've been ignored or marginalized, and this is an opportunity for us to break barriers and be a part of the conversation. I think also one thing I did want to recognize was that there was so many Muslim women across the nation who were also able to win their seats in their House, from Delaware to Oklahoma, North Carolina. There was just so many Muslim women winning elections. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to see and be heard.
Lila, how do you feel about all of the wonderful Muslim women showing up in this election cycle? What's your perspective?
I think it's amazing. I think it's a display or kind of the fruits of our labor from, the last several years of all the work that RISE has been doing, other Muslim women organizers, to go from, just a handful of women in 2016 or 2018 to now, double that amount, that is, that's amazing. That means that we're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to have representation. We were everywhere. We saw Muslim women who were doing, political advocacy or civic engagement like Asma and Aaisha. We saw them leading organizations and phone banking, GOTV forums and roundtables and candidate meet and greets and trainings. We saw Muslim women organize on the streets. They were knocking doors for everyone, really, from status quo to our own community members to communities that have been most marginalized and ignored. We led campaigns and volunteered on campaigns just to do whatever to get our candidates to win. We engaged in agenda forming with candidates from all level, including the Biden-Harrison campaign, and we ran for office. And Just to, well, first of all, congratulate, school board-elect Sharon El-Amin, Representative Horan Hassan, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar on winning. We have women in seats and women who ran for seats who have, historically ignored who we are. And so, just like Aaisha said, this is representation, and this is kind of the first step to removing barriers for people who worship like us and who look like us or who share several of our identities.
And some of the stories over the last few years, having Rise co-partner with this show, my heart's been touched in the way that the encouragement to step out of maybe comfort zone and to run for leadership. Can you tell me a little bit about that process of how you've encouraged women to feel confident in stepping up and saying, yeah, I'll run?
I think what Rise has been doing these last several years is kind of providing the tools and the skills for these women to feel confident in running. And so I think as a young Muslim woman, when I know an organization is backing me and I know I'll have people in my corner, it gives me the confidence or the ability to be like, okay, I know I can do this. And then I know they're not going to just drop me once I win or lose my election. So I think that's an important aspect that makes Rise unique in this process. I think they provide the tools for sisters to feel confident to run, but then also stick with them throughout their time in office and support them in any way possible. And I think as time goes on and more people are seeing the success of other Muslim women, they're feeling the confidence to step up and being like, oh, well, Ilhan was able to do this, and this is the changes she brought to our community. Let me see what I can do and bring change to my community, or how I can support my community at the end of the day.
And I love that idea that you're just not alone, and you can feel so alone in taking on an election. You have people around you, but that's different than saying we're going to give you tools. We're going to be there every step of the way. It's a different, nurturing and supportive environment that I've been just struck by and so admire.
Yeah, for sure.
Lila, tell me a little bit about the organization also that you're part of with founding the East Metro for a Better Tomorrow.
Yeah, so this is actually a co-founded group with other East Metro folks who have been really active on the ground, especially post George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd. And what we do, or what we've done this election cycle, is to really try to go to people who would historically not be involved, and we set up opportunities for people to get to know candidates through forums. We did school board forums, forums with state representatives and senators and things like that. So we try to really break down information and make it relevant to communities of color, Black, Indigenous, and people of color specifically, because we haven't seen that. Usually, Senator Susan Kent said it best. We generally hear about race questions or issues surrounding race as a sidebar item, and so we really zoomed in and focused on that, so that candidates, people who are trying to make a decision on which candidate to choose would be able to see where they stand specifically on issues that intimately affect Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We went out and set up registration tables, voter registration tables, and what we found is people don't know where to ask questions, and so a lot of the things that we were doing was answering questions and providing resources and finding out what other barriers exist, and then we went back and we tried to figure out which candidates need our help, and we assisted the candidates that needed help. So those are some of the things that we did, and we will be continuing to do that and continuing to answer, the calls within our communities.
When you look back in doing the work that you've done in creating access to information, essentially for the community and giving them the opportunity to learn and feel a part of it, were there steps along the way that you had kind of aha moments? I mean, you mentioned one aha moment that they just didn't know where to go to ask this kind of information. Were there other aha moments for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the aha moments that I had was we set up a forum for the St. Paul School Board candidate forum for the special election seat, and how eager and how in tune all of the candidates were to the questions that we had about students who face barriers because of, because of the systemic barriers that exist in our system because of being, Black and brown and indigenous. Whereas in Stillwater, we attempted to set up, this forum and how much we struggled to bring folks to the table because of how afraid or how much of a stigma there was with being present in a room that specifically addressed race, and how much that would affect, even though they might, advocate for students of color, how worried they were that would affect them. That was a big aha moment. I mean, we knew that there was a big difference between schools in, say, St. Paul or Minneapolis versus the suburbs, but that fear, the barrier is even higher than we thought. Just aligning yourself or branding yourself, especially if you can present that status quo, it is really, really deep, and we have a lot of work to do, I think, in the suburbs.
Well, that is a great note to end on, and to let folks know that in our next segment, we'll continue to talk about local elections and what ways what we learned during this time can help prepare us for local elections in the future, taking those aha moments and preparing to continue this good work. So stay with us, and we'll be right back and ready to talk about what's next. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've joined the conversation today. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host. And today we have Connections community partner, Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, RISE. To learn more about RISE, you can go to the revivingsisterhood.org. Want to learn more about Connections Radio? You can go to connectionsradiomn.com. And our sponsor today is Clockwork. And to learn more about Clockwork, you can go to clockwork.com. So thank you for being here today. And our co-hosts are Aaisha Abdullahi, who is the Civic Engagement Coordinator. We also have Lila Eltawili, who is the co-founder of East Metro for a Better Tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
We started talking about it in the first segment, both the our presidential election as well as local elections. And I'd like to dig a little deeper. I loved our conversation, how we're talking about how do we really have those aha moments that open people up to really share what they need, share their fears. We started talking about there's some real fears out there that need to be talked about. And how do we continue to support Muslim women and have these conversations and get women on the ballot in this in future elections? So, Aaisha, tell me about the representation and why you think this is so important, and how, and elaborate a little bit more than what you did in our first segment about how you see going forward.
Yeah, so when it comes to representation, I think it's more than just having someone be able to speak on your behalf, or those that are have been through struggles with you, but rather somebody that has lived the experience at the end of the day. And so when it comes to Muslim women, I think for such a long time, it was always their concerns were being ignored or never really at the table, as I mentioned earlier. And so when Ilhan was able to break through in 2016, I think that sparked a little momentum in the community, and recognizing that, Muslim women do have a chance in getting into these spaces, and it's not all as difficult as we made it seem or assumed it was. And so once that happened, I think younger Muslim women started recognizing the opportunities they have and started running for office. And so I think that was something that this election really, I was able to recognize that there was a lot of young Muslim women taking the opportunity to run. And it was them challenging the system in which they didn't really, many times were told they weren't welcomed in and did not have the voice or opportunity in. And so seeing those women step up and take a chance, I think that was really really fulfilling to see, especially with the work that we've been doing and trying to give them the platform and opportunity to be successful. I think them taking advantage and utilizing it in this election was really just really nice to see, and hope to see more of in the future.
I'm going to paraphrase because Ilhan says it much better, but I love when she says Minnesota not only welcomes immigrants, we send them to Congress to represent us. And it's just, it has so much heart, and she has so much love for Minnesota that it's inspiring.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. We're not only a lot of times when especially first generation immigrants are sitting in these spaces for a long time, it was just survival. That was the goal. Survive living in the U.S., survive living in Minnesota. But now it's like, I can do more and be more than just another person in the cities. I can be a part of the conversation. I can make the changes needed, whether it's in the Minneapolis School Board, whether it's in the City Council, whether it's at the legislative session in the House. It really, I have the opportunity to take up space, and I think that's important, that we start taking up these spaces and be a part of the process.
And celebrate it. I remember when she was elected, and I had a show with Asma, and Asma was at the celebrating party, and she goes, it was like a wedding. I mean, the ceremony was just amazing. There was so much joy. There was so much revelation and excitement of, the potential, and celebrating the potential.
Exactly. And it also was a path to a new future. I think once that happened, it was there's more for us in these spaces now. And so she really gave the hope for young Muslim women to move forward.
So in looking at the candidacy and basing, looking at opportunities, how do you encourage and keep encouraging folks to aspire to candidacy?
I think for me personally, it's especially for those who were able to make it through primaries but weren't elected. I think it's to tell them that was just the first step. That was a learning experience for a lot of women. It was the first time ever running an election, being a part of a campaign, or somewhat in those spaces. And so I think for me, these were learning experiences. And as a first time even making it past the primaries, that's a huge success in my opinion.
That's a win. That's a huge win.
That's a huge win. And so I'm really encouraging, especially from 2018 when we only had 5 Muslim women running to now in 2020, we saw 10. So our numbers were doubled this election process. I think it's showing that okay, we're figured that was a learning experience. We won the first step, and now it's what can we do better, or what can we do to support you to now help you actually win your seats and get into office. And so I'm really excited to see what we will be able to accomplish in 2022 and really see the representation of Muslim women.
And debriefing, finding where were the strengths, where were the opportunities, what are the opportunities in the future? Because I don't think any of the women lost, because they were able to experience what it means to go through an election process. And that gives them so much knowledge and we talked lived experience to know what's coming up. There's no more mystery to it. And at that point, I think they're just preparing themselves for the future leadership that they will gain.
No.
And they are leaders. Whether they won the election or not, they are strong leaders and have a voice that they brought to the process.
Yeah. Layla, I just wanted to ask, based on your experience as a candidate, what would you say to sisters who may not have won their race this election cycle? How would you encourage for them to continue showing up?
Yeah, well, from my experience, I know that it takes an extraordinary amount of effort to run, right? And every time we run, we clean up and remove barriers that, the person before us had to work through. There's one of the biggest barriers I think sisters in our community face, and other Black and Brown and Indigenous women or people in general face, is having to figure out the process. When you become a candidate, you have to have a solid team around you, but you're still learning what it actually means and what it means to have a team and who needs to be there and what role they need to play. And so all of these things slow you down. I'd honestly start out by saying, I'm proud of you. Everyone deserves, a massive celebration. I also know that it's a very lonely space. You exit these races, especially if you don't win, extremely exhausted. And I think there's a lot of, feelings and emotions that you go through that other people might not understand because, almost there probably isn't anyone that in your circle who's run. And so that's kind of where RISE comes in, right? This connection between women in these leadership positions and women who were successfully elected, who can maybe sit down and connect. I would encourage them to continue to run. They've inspired communities of women to not only see themselves in these roles, but to see themselves as successful, like the next Ilhan, right? The next Hodan Hassan, the next Sharon Alamin. So I would continue to encourage them to run. I would let them rest because, my goodness, you need rest after running a campaign. But to also, check in and see what they need. What do they need in order to get back up and continue this fight? I've told a few candidates that think of this as a dry run, right? This was your trying it out. You now built a successful team. You now know what the process looks like. You now have a platform that you fine-tuned. You have your talking notes put together. And it's time for you to just rest and to start this back up very soon. And there's absolutely no reason why someone wouldn't be able to, re-announce that they're going to run again in 2022 and then just continue this race on. And like you all said, running is in itself successful. The amount of people that I had telling me that they felt inspired and that they felt that they were represented and that, I was speaking on issues that they've never heard other people speaking on and that they saw advocacy in me that they'd never seen in other candidates. That in itself really, really forced me to stay involved and to continue to remove those barriers and to continue to think of ways where I can encourage other women and to demystify the system and the process so that other people can come in and then I can support them from the ground up and help them be successful. So, those are all the things that I think that I learned, that I've observed from other people. But again, just congratulate these women and just like everyone else said, representation really matters. And so we absolutely need them to continue this race, and to continue until they finally become, elected into those seats.
And with that perfect note, we'll need to end this segment. And I want to remind our audience that you're listening to Connections Radio Show here at AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. And join us in our next segment as we're going to be discussing some of the other challenges that face our Muslim sisters who are running for election. Sometimes there's the downside, and the Islamophobia in elections is also something that needs to be addressed and needs to have our support in making the changes that can confront and support those who are running. So stay with us as we talk about that in our next segment. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. I'm glad you've joined the conversation. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host, and today we have our Connections community partner, Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, RISE. And my co-hosts are Aaisha Abdullahi, who is the Civic Engagement Coordinator, and Lila El-Tawili, who is the co-founder of the East Metro for a Better Tomorrow. We've been talking about how inspiring candidates, we've got double candidates that we've had in the past. We had 10 wonderful Muslim women who ran for office, and how to encourage those who did not win to see themselves as winners, see themselves as leaders, preparing for their next journey and their next leadership opportunity. But we also need to talk about the challenges as well. And one of the challenges is facing Islamophobia in elections. And Aaisha and Lila, tell me a little bit about how you feel about how we need to face this Islamophobia, and also what you need from your allies to support you in this.
Yeah. I think as a Muslim woman, it's very easy to identify many of us with wearing the hijab and having that statement wear on us all the time. And so when it comes to that, I think it's easy to target us. And I think when we have people in office like Trump who purposely target Muslim women and purposely gaslight them during his campaign process, it shows that, like, it makes it seem that it's okay to do this. And so with that, I think Muslim women have taken those insults and those gaslighting moments and really fueled it so that they could now become a part of the same system in which he is trying to keep them out of. And I think that is something we have faced. And I think from allies, one thing I always love is it's having the constant support and having the backing of those that can help us get into office and make the difference when being heard by an ally and having their support. Layla, what would you say with Islamophobia that a lot of Muslim candidates face? How could they combat that, especially as a candidate?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I actually faced quite a bit of Islamophobia in my race, and I used to wear the hijab, but when I was running for office, I was not wearing it. And I remember one day, trying to get campaign work done at a coffee shop and logging into Facebook and realizing that someone shared my campaign announcement in a 45,000 member pro-Trump page. And I remember the sense of panic I had as they talked about, all of the things that they were going to, violent, terrible things that they were going to do to me. I slammed my laptop shut, threw it in my backpack, and I don't remember the trip home. I just know that I got home and I was just terrified of what could happen to my kids. I ended up actually speaking to Ilhan about my experience, how, that affected me, but also the Islamophobia we face from the parties that we are part of. Islamophobia is not just from pro-Trumpers. It's from people who share the same party and somewhat of the same political beliefs as us. I had to always make sure that, males in my family, my husband, my brothers, even my sons, were not visible at times where I was meeting with people in my district, because I didn't want them to think that I was this weak Muslim woman, which is a stereotype, right? We're oppressed. I didn't want them to think that. I want them to see and hear me for who I was, rather than any type of stereotypes that they have in their mind. So there's a massive mental gymnastics that we play just to be taken seriously as Muslim women, and most of us happen to also be Black and brown candidates. So there's this process that we have to go through go through in our heads just to show up, right? There's a level of safety that we have to account for. I know that for me, I have to always think of safety plans. You know, if I take this route this day, I can't take this route on that day, you know, like when I announce my, event. So, there's just this level of, like I said, mental gymnastics that we have to play. And when, you know, the terror comes from the highest office in our country, it makes it, you know, okay. It becomes okay. Like, you know, I'm thinking of Ilhan and what she had to go through. I mean, do you go to Washington and do your work, or do you stay back and make sure your kids are safe? So there's just a lot. I think there's massive space for allies to step in and, you know, pay attention and to know when they're supposed to step in and keep us safe, or, you know, speak up for us, or shut down the system, or, you know, uplift us, back us up, like Aaisha said, and help us really transform these experiences into power.
I have to admit, I've had such admiration for Ilhan's grace as she has just been bombarded. I mean, Trump stated it from the get-go that he had a Muslim ban, and then when she was elected to office, he has targeted her repeatedly, chanting at rallies. I mean, it's just I think we need more people to not just go, oh, it's just Trump. No, he is enabling scary people to potentially do scary things. And
Exactly.
and I silence is violence. We heard that from the point when George Floyd. What can allies do? We can't be silent. You know, we need to say this is wrong. This is shameful. This needs to stop. And your mental gymnastics paints, I think, such a tough picture of how you need to navigate through obstacles and huge threats that's just unfair. I mean, that's not how our country was founded. We were supposed to be able to have all people created equal and not demonize. And I always appreciate the thoughts and suggestions of what we can do to continue to support your leadership efforts, because you bring such insights and thoughtfulness and new ways of thinking and partnering and nurturing that our country needs.
So I think, Layla, you bring such a great point up of hyper-awareness, essentially, that Muslim women have to have, and, like, really consider everyone in their life when it comes to, like, running for an election or being a part of the system and things like that. It's them constantly concerned about their loved ones and the attacks that they also face with it. But I think also it's just being a Muslim woman, I think it was going to, just place a huge target on all women's backs. And I think one thing I was thinking about is, like, Rashida from Michigan does not wear the hijab, yet she's always targeted as well. Mm-hmm. And so and then on top of that, these Muslim women are now black and brown identified. So they're just targeted more in a sense because all their identities are marginalized pretty much. And they're of the minority in every single one of the identities. So Muslim women are just constantly in an uphill battle and just look for allies to help release the burden of some sort, because we're always climbing up and we're always fighting some sort of battle, whether it's religious, racial, or gender-wise.
Well, my hope also is that Biden will bring a multicultural team that represents a new way of supporting many voices and leading with many voices and insights. And we've lived through 4 years of someone demonizing multicultural. Right. It will be welcoming new reality to have that be celebrated. And hopefully that will create more allies to understand how important it is to support your voices. And with that, we do need to go to break. We'll go for just a few short commercials, but I'm looking forward to our next segment on what we can expect from RISE in the coming year. and good work that's being done with RISE. So stay with us as we are on Connections Radio Show here on AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. And we're glad that you joined the conversation today. I'm Laurie Fitz, your host. And we have had the Reviving the Islamic Sisterhood for Empowerment, which is RISE, as our co-partner and our co-productions of our community programming. To learn more about them, I highly encourage going to their website. It's revivingsisterhood.org. If you want to learn more about our radio show, you can go to connectionsradiomn.com. And a big thank you to Clockwork, and they are our sponsor, and their website is clockwork.com. Our co-hosts today have been Aaisha Abdullahi, who is the Civic Engagement Coordinator, and Lila Eltawili, who is the co-founder of the East Metro for a Better Tomorrow. Thank you both for sharing such wonderful insights today.
Thank you.
And tell me about what's happening in RISE coming up.
Yeah, so now that we have elected officials selected and things like that, we are now preparing for the legislative session coming up in just a few short weeks. It's a budget year this year, and so it's really important that we highlight the needs of our community and show them how we'd like funding to be changed or a part of our conversation this season. I just think with COVID and the pandemic really impacting lots of community, including ours, we just want to find ways that we can find support for them at the end of the day.
And what are good ways to make that happen?
I think the biggest way we can make a difference is contacting legislators. So RISE will be hosting a kind of day at the Capitol, a virtual one, in late January, early February. And so we're hoping that with that we can connect people with their legislators, introduce them to their senators and their House representatives, and then kind of have them contact them and be a part of the process. I think these elected officials work for their community, and so if their citizens and their community members are reaching out and saying that their constituents are mentioning that they want these certain things funded or they want certain support in any way, then that we can eventually get what we would like to be funded.
And it sounds like there's really education on two parts. There's education to get the community to feel good about asking for what they need and what they want and what they believe in, because they put representatives that are, to be listening to them. But also there's an accountability and making sure that those who have been elected are accountable. Lila, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, accountability to me is probably one of the most important pieces of this whole process, right? We have candidates who just made a bunch of promises, people lined up behind them, voted for them, and now they are our person, right? They represent us. They are there for us. We chose them. And so paying attention to what it is that they're doing once they become elected in whatever seat that they're in, watching if they, how they vote, if they're showing up to vote, whether or not they're speaking up, the questions that they're asking in sessions, how they're communicating, are they making effort to reach across to people who didn't necessarily agree with them? Are they reaching to the people who do agree with them, right? Are they still attempting to really build great community connections versus, a transactional relationship where they're only showing up for people to vote? And so, the other thing that I wanted to highlight is now with, first-time candidates, the skills needed in order to win a race is completely different than the skills needed to become a great representative. And if you're new, you still have to really nurture that. You still have to learn quite a bit. This is a new role. It's a new job, and there isn't necessarily a process of training necessarily. It's kind of the learn as you go with some trainings that, like in House and Senate seats, maybe some trainings done by the House or the Senate, or by, the leader of your party. So, really, really checking in with those people and checking to see what they need, and then also just hold them accountable by asking additional questions and asking them how they're doing and watching them and paying attention. I know with Aaisha touched on this being a budget year, we really need to pay attention in 2021. We are, as Muslims, and, many, many Muslims are, Black and brown. A lot of what happened with COVID impacts us directly. And so one of the ways that we really need to hold all of our electeds accountable is by really paying attention at how they're going to handle this budget and what they're going to allocate for the needs of our community. And when we don't agree, we show up and we speak up. And when our representatives ask us to testify, we show up and we testify. And, the same energy it took to get these people elected is the same energy it takes to keep them in their seats and to also force them to be accountable to us by doing the right thing for our communities.
When you mention about budget and making sure that we are investing in the right areas and making sure that we're investing to those that most need, especially during this pandemic, it reminds me of, when our budget reflects our priorities. So how do we make sure that our priorities are being heard and understood? And also when you're talking about the difference between running for something or governing, that old phrase of that you campaign in poetry, but you need to govern in prose has deep meaning, because there is a different style in which how do you bring people together. Well, we've got about a minute left. I'd love to have you both share something that you'd like to see for RISE, and then you'd like to see also for allies to support RISE.
I can go first. I think one thing I'm excited to see with RISE is just how we will make a difference this session. I think I'm excited for us to be a part of the process and the conversation and really be able to advocate for our community and give them the platform needed to make sure that their needs are met, and just really taking the time for allies to really connect and understand the importance of their support and their backing at the end of the day. I think we got people into office. Now it's time to hold them accountable and make sure they're serving what's best for their constituents at the end of the day.
Lila, we have 30 seconds.
Yep. Everything that Aaisha said. I'd love to see the changes that and the impact that we make, in legislation. And allies, same thing. Back us up, please. We can't do this work without our allies. So.
Thank you so much for a wonderful show today. And for everyone out there, thank you for being part of our wonderful multicultural community. And let's do our part to support everyone.